industry, but he recognises how the investments in Corbyn and his constituency will also be important to the investments that are taking place in South Wales. There have been renewal of the blast furnaces in South Wales. We're working hard in securing a steel sector deal, and they will provide support to the industry in North Wales, South Wales, as well as in Corbyn and elsewhere across the UK.
Wales is ideally placed to develop pioneering renewable energy projects, especially wave, tidal and hydro, which could make a valuable contribution to achieving net zero carbon emissions. Can the Secretary of State assure us that Wales will receive sufficient support from the industrial strategy, and in particular the £2.5 billion Clean Growth Fund, to realise this potential and not be left yet again to rue missed opportunities?
Mr Speaker, I've already pointed out that as part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, Wales is fourth in the UK of any nation and region in terms of being successful in gaining that. Swansea University's project for the active homes, the specific project, is world leading in using the latest materials to develop energy positive properties. Just down the road from the Honourable Member's constituency is Pembroke Dock Marine, and I think that these are exciting areas of policy for which the Honourable Member's constituency can develop from and take opportunities from as well.
Number 5, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and with your permission I will answer questions 5, 11 and 14 together. I have regular discussions with the Welsh Government on a range of issues, including the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Officials have already held useful preliminary discussions with their Welsh Government counterparts, which will of course continue.
Mr Speaker, a lot of people in Wales are worried that the Shared Prosperity Fund is just a sneaky Tory plot to steal back a measure of devolution and to cut our funds again. Can the Secretary of State reassure the House that that isn't true, and can he start by telling us whether we will get £370 million in the first year of the Shared Prosperity Fund?
Mr Speaker, ensuring all parts of Wales benefit from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is central to our approach, but I hope he would also agree with stakeholders across Wales, be that in businesses, local authorities, that there is a better way of delivering such regional support rather than following the current model that comes from the European Union. He's also seeking to tempt me to preempt the comprehensive spending review, which will of course talk about the quantum of sum available.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State will be well aware that the £1.3 billion a year from EU structural funds are vital to economies like Scotland's and Wales and Northern Ireland's and the north of England as well. So when there's no clarity over what its replacement is going to look like in the Shared Prosperity Fund, there's been no consultation whatsoever. Why is there such a delay in the consultation which was meant to happen last year?
Well, similarly, Mr Speaker, I hope the Honourable Member will recognise there is a better way of delivering, because Wales has received £4 billion over 17 years. We will be consulting shortly, but even ahead of that formal consultation, there is lots of preliminary work ongoing. The Welsh Government and the UK Government were recently at St Asaph, for example, where the Welsh Government jointly presented. This demonstrates the joint work is taking place.
Is talking about awarding this money in Wales on the basis of a competition between different local authorities and areas. Can he squash that rumour? Because what will inevitably happen is that all the money will end up going to middle-class areas rather than to the areas of greatest need like the Rhondda. What is wrong with the fundamental principle of from each according to his or her ability, to each according to his or her need?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Member is preempting the consultation. Of course, we will work with local authorities, and there are different views amongst local authorities across Wales of how we deliver the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The Honourable Member's authority will have some frustrations as well as some successes around the current European Structural Funds model, and this is an opportunity to improve on that.
Mr Speaker, could the Minister confirm that the UK Shared Prosperity Funds means that Wales will not lose a penny as a result of leaving the European Union? And could he also confirm that this funding could be used for projects such as the much-needed Chepstow bypass?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Chepstow bypass, of course, is a joint responsibility, but there's no doubt that my honourable friend has campaigned vociferously for this for some time, and I know that my honourable friend, the Minister, visited that within days of becoming the Minister to work with my honourable friend. I'm determined to do everything in order to ensure that we can deliver that, of course, but we need the Welsh Government to act as well, to highlight it as one of their priorities.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Shared Prosperity Fund represents a huge opportunity for North Wales. Can my right honourable friend confirm that in designing the fund he will liaise closely with North Wales local authorities and that he will urge his colleagues in the Treasury to avoid the temptation of simply passing it down to the black hole in Cardiff?
Well, my right honourable friend, Mr Speaker, makes an extremely important point, and of course we are already liaising with stakeholders in Wales, particularly with local authorities, and there are a range of views amongst local authorities of how we should deliver the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I don't want to preempt the consultation. Of course, we will consider all of those matters, but he and I will want to deliver a scheme that serves all parts of Wales. It's central to our policy to ensure that every part can equally win some investment.
Much to do and very little time in which to do it. Christina Rees.
May I welcome the new Minister to his place, and may I inquire if he's on a temporary or a permanent contract?
0 hours. 0 hours.
Our manifesto for the European elections states, under Labour, no region or nation would lose out on funding, and power over decisions affecting investment will be taken in Scotland, Wales and in English regions. Will the Secretary of State tell us what his party's European election manifesto says about EU funding in Wales post-Brexit?
Mr Speaker, I don't need to read any manifesto because I can repeat what I have said and what the Chancellor has said previously. We've already committed to fund any project that has been agreed prior to our departure from the European Union, even when funding falls beyond that point.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm still not sure whether you've got a manifesto or not. If you've got one, it's incredibly well hidden. I couldn't find it. It's as well hidden as the UK Shared Prosperity consultation, which should have started before Christmas. Where is it? Will the Secretary of State commit here and now to the principle of not a penny less, not a power lost for the people of Wales, and do his job for once and stand up for the people of Wales?
Well, Mr Speaker, I will absolutely ensure that Wales receives its fair share, and I would point to her party's record in government and my party's record in government. As a result of the new fair funding settlement, Wales receives £120 for every £100 spent in England, far in excess of anything that her party ever had left.
Shepherd.
Number 6, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Silk Commission's analysis in 2014 concluding social security, including welfare, should remain non-devolved. This recommendation had cross-party support when it was considered under the St David's Day process.
Tommy Shepherd.
Given the experience in Scotland where even a limited devolution of social security powers has allowed the Scottish Government to mitigate the worst excesses of Tory austerity and reduce rates of absolute child poverty, doesn't that show that devolution works? And isn't it now time to allow the Welsh Government to design a social security system that fits the character and the aspirations of the people of Wales?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I must say, those who look at the social security system and devolution in Scotland may have a very different picture of it to that being presented by our colleagues in the separatists over there. The reality is there are a number of powers that have been devolved in the Scotland Act 2016 that the party in Holyrood have decided not to use. So I think those looking at Scotland, well, I'm afraid, take a very different conclusion to the one the honourable member suggests.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I start by welcoming my honourable friend to his place? And as and when welfare powers are devolved, does he agree with me how important it is that devolved administrations continue to work with the DWP in order to benefit those who most need the support, and not just for political posturing by those interested in breaking up the United Kingdom?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question. As always, he's right to say that it's time the government in Holyrood, run by the SNP, more focused on the job of actually governing rather than trying to build constitutional grievances. But yes, it's right that the DWP continues to work with all stakeholders across our United Kingdom to ensure we provide the support that is needed as part of our welfare system.
Reed Jones.
Number 7, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by welcoming the Honourable Lady to her seat in this place for her first Welsh questions, and I'm sure she'll be as strong an advocate for her constituents as her predecessor was, and was a much valued member of this place. This government is committed to ensuring economic security for people at every stage of their life, including when they reach retirement. There were over 100,000 claimants in Wales in receipt of pension credit in August 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Older People's Commissioner for Wales has found that £170 million of pension credit went unclaimed in 2016-17. This is a massive amount of money that could make a real difference to some of the poorest people in Wales. Now, we know that pensioners in Wales are not taking up pension credit, but how is the government monitoring this to note any recognisable trends, and what is the government doing to ensure pensioners in Wales receive the money that's rightfully theirs?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be concerned to hear of any person not getting the support that this Parliament has voted for them to have. We are engaging with people who may be eligible to these benefits at pivotal stages, such as when they claim state pension or report a change in their circumstances. We're also looking to work with stakeholders such as Independent Age and Age UK to discuss pension credit take-up across Great Britain, and would obviously encourage members of Parliament to play a role in their own constituencies as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 120,000 pensioners in Wales live in poverty. The government has worsened their financial position today with changes to pension credit for mixed-age couples, which will leave some married pensioners worse off by up to £7,000 a year. Will the Secretary of State meet with the Shadow Wales team, Citizens Advise Wales and pensioner organisations to listen to the just concerns and grievances of elderly citizens who've paid into the system and their entire lives and now feel betrayed and left behind by this government?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suppose it's somewhat apt that a mixed-age couples question comes to myself, for those who know my own background. But in terms of it, we believe that it's about balancing fairness in the pension system and in the welfare system between the taxpayers who pay for it and those who need to benefit from it. And we do not believe this change is unfair. However, there is an issue of making sure those who are entitled to pension credit do take it up and receive it. And I'm always happy to meet people to discuss how we do that.
Oh, very well, yes. Mr. Ian C. Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. How many pensioners in Wales will lose out as a result of the Tory government's hospital path to the BBC to take away pensioners' TV licences?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BBC had a strong and good settlement that was actually agreed, including the responsibility for this benefit when it was last agreed.
Order, colleagues. Today, Ms Gladys Kokonwi, the Speaker of the Botswanan Parliament, is visiting the House. Indeed, she's with us for the rest of the week, accompanied by a team of colleagues. And we warmly welcome you, Madam Speaker, to our Parliament. We value our relations with you and indeed with your country. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Alan Brown.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, may I start by thanking the Mental Health Foundation for organising this year's Mental Health Awareness Week. Having good mental health is vital to us all, and that's why we're investing record levels in mental health. We want to ensure that people receive the treatment and care when they need it. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I will today be joining world leaders and internet companies for a summit in Paris on tackling terrorist use of the internet.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and obviously I support Mental Health Week as well. Mr. Speaker, instead of a transplant providing my constituent Pauline Hunt an improved and extended life, tragically she's received a death sentence after receiving a malignant kidney. Now, Pauline rightly needs answers, and comfort this won't happen to anyone else. So rather than her having to fight the system to get these answers, will the Prime Minister make sure that the UK service, NHS Blood and Transplant Service, undertake a case review to identify why this malignancy wasn't picked up earlier and why red flags weren't identified post-operation as well?
Well, the honourable gentleman has clearly raised a very concerning case. And obviously he's given some details of that case here on the floor of the House. I will ensure that a relevant minister looks at the issue that he has raised, because obviously it is a matter of concern if somebody receives something that they believe is going to give them their life. And it is a malignant transplant, a transplant of a malignant organ, as he has said in this case. So I will ensure that the Department of Health, the relevant minister, looks at this.
Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has often spoken about how important it is to ensure that everyone gets a fair chance in life, and that, of course, includes carers. So will she join me in welcoming the award to Annette Collier that was made at Friday's Pride of Rugby Awards, run by our fabulous local radio station? Annette's a leader for rugby young carers, and her great dedication, inspiration and enthusiasm is helping youngsters in my constituency live their own lives.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting this particular issue, because we obviously recognise the importance of supporting young carers. We've published a cross-government carers action plan which is committing to improve the identification of young carers, educational opportunities and outcomes, as well as access to support and services. But I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in congratulating Annette for this award and thanking her for the amazing work she's done and continues to do to support young carers, and also to congratulate Rugby FM for identifying people in the community like Annette, who are doing so much to help the lives of others.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in acknowledging Mental Health Awareness Week, and I want to send my support to all those campaigning all across the country to raise awareness of mental health, and also a message that all of us can do something about it by reaching out and talking to people going through a mental health crisis, and also ensuring there's proper funding for our mental health services. I would also like, Mr. Speaker, to pay tribute to the former Labour MP for Birmingham All Saints, Brian Walden, who passed away this week. He was a very formidable figure in this House and a very strong political interviewer, which every politician really loved being interviewed by at the time, but they only said that afterwards. I think, Mr. Speaker, it would also be only right that the House of Commons, and I'm tempted to quote some Doris Day songs, but I won't. All right, whip crack away. No. I do apologise, Mr. Speaker. I've obviously started a parliamentary sing-along here. And speaking of icons, Mr. Speaker, it would be right to acknowledge that it's 40 years since the members for Huddersfield and Birkenhead were both elected to this Parliament for the first time in the 1979 election. Mr. Speaker, in the last 2 years, 9 of the UK's richest hedge fund tycoons have donated £2.9 million to the Conservative Party. Is this a government for the many, or in the pockets of an elite few?
Can I first of all respond to some of the tributes that the right honourable gentleman played? I'm sure that across the House everybody would wish to recognise the sad passing of somebody who gave many hours of entertainment through her films and career, Doris Day. I also would like to congratulate the honourable members for Huddersfield and Birkenhead on having been elected into this House 40 years and having spent 40 years in this House. I also note that 40 years ago, of course, it was the election of Margaret Thatcher in this House and the Conservative government. And Margaret, and it was always said that Margaret Thatcher had indeed enjoyed being interviewed by Brian Walden. And he did indeed not only have a career in this House, but went on to have a very respected career in television journalism as a broadcaster and interviewer. But can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he raises issues about fairness and about equality and those who are better off in our society. Can I just say to him that income inequality is down since 2010. As Conservatives, we want everyone to be better off, everyone to have good jobs, and everyone to have a better life. But that's always the difference between us and Labour. Labour want to bring people down, we want to raise people up.
Mr. Speaker, the Nobel Prize-winning economist Sir Angus Deaton said the UK risks having extreme inequality levels of pay, wealth and health. Of the G7 countries, only the United States is more unequal than Britain. Is that something the Prime Minister is proud of?
Like I say to the right honourable gentleman, that what is important, as I say, talking about income inequality and fairness, as I say, income inequality is down since 2010. The lowest paid had seen their wages grow the fastest since 2015. The top 1% are contributing more income tax than at any point under the last Labour government. And thanks to the Conservatives, millions of people, the lowest paid, are no longer paying any income tax at all. That's Conservatives delivering for everyone.
Mr. Speaker, real wages are lower than they were 10 years ago. And how can it be fair that we live in a society where the average chief executive of a FTSE 100 company now earns 145 times the annual average salary in this country? And some of the lowest rates of pay are amongst young workers. That's why at the weekend I announced that the next Labour government will abolish the youth rates because, quite simply, if you're old enough to do the job, you're old enough to be paid the wage to do the job. Does the Prime Minister agree with that principle?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that the impact of the policy he has announced was actually that it will cost young people jobs. And that's not just what I'm saying. The director of the IFS said the policy would end up having quite a negative effect on young people. But we don't need to rely on quotes to know about what would happen to young people under a policy like that. We just look at the record that the last Labour government had on youth employment. Under the last Labour government, youth unemployment rose by 44%. Under the Conservatives in government, youth unemployment has fallen by 50%.
I seem to recall, Mr. Speaker, it was the Conservative Party that opposed the national minimum wage in 1997. I seem to recall it was the Conservative Party that predicted millions of jobs would be lost because we wanted decent pay for people. But why, Mr. Speaker, does this government continue to punish our young people? Since 2010, the Conservative Party, with the Liberal Democrat accomplices, have trebled tuition fees, abolished the educational maintenance allowance and cut child benefit. And while wages remain lower than a decade ago and housing costs have soared, more and more food banks are opening up in Britain. In Great Yarmouth, one has just been opened for pupils at a school. And last week, the Department of Business established a food bank for its own staff in the building there on Victoria Street. Can the Prime Minister tell us what is going wrong in modern Britain that a government office in the centre of London has a food bank for some of its very low-paid staff to get something to eat?
To the right honourable gentleman, as he knows, I think that the best way to ensure that people have a good income and a stable income for their families is to ensure that they're in work. And this is the fourth question he's asked me. The fourth question he's asked me, and in none of his questions so far has he welcomed the fact that employment is at record levels and unemployment is down at a record low. And the way the right honourable gentleman talks, you would think that inequality started in 2010. But who was it who said, oh, one of the Labour backbenchers shouts from a sedentary position? It did. Who was it who said of the last Labour government, they ensured that the gap between the richest and the poorest in our society became very much bigger? Not my words, the words of the right honourable gentleman attacking his own Labour government.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about food banks in a government office which seems to me...
Order! I'm very, very, very worried about you, Mr. Spencer. You used to be such a calm and measured fellow. You're now behaving in an extraordinarily eccentric manner, almost delinquent. Calm yourself, young man, and your condition will improve. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about a food bank in a government ministry, which seems to me to suggest that it's in-work poverty that is the problem in Britain. The Trussell Trust handed out 1.6 million food parcels last year, 500,000 of which went to children. And there's a new report out today from the End Child Poverty Coalition, which shows that child poverty has risen by 500,000 and is becoming the new norm in this country. The End Child Poverty Coalition called on ministers to restore the link between inflation and social security. Will the Prime Minister do that to try and reduce the disgraceful levels of child poverty in this country?
The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about helping those who are low paid. It is this government, it is a Conservative government that introduced the national living wage. And what do we see? What do we see? That someone under Labour, someone working full-time on national minimum wage, would have taken home £9,200 a year. Now they take home over £13,700, £4,500 more under the Conservatives for the lowest paid. That's the Conservatives caring for the low paid in our society.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, they may have changed the name, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies says that child poverty will rise to over 5 million by 2022 at the current rate because of the strategies being followed by her government. When the wealth of the richest 1,000 people in Britain has increased by £50 billion in 1 year, but there's not enough money to properly feed our children or pay workers a decent wage, then we have failed as a society. This country is seeing the rich get richer while the poor get poorer, while the government is in the pockets of a super-rich elite. More children in poverty, more pensioners in poverty, more people struggling to make ends meet. When is she and her government going to reverse the tax giveaways to the super-rich and make sure they pay their fair share of taxes so we can end the scandal, and it is a scandal, of inequality in modern Britain?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about, in fact, as I pointed out, the top 1% are paying more in income tax today than they ever did under a Labour government. But what have we seen from Labour in just the past week? Labour Party has a plan for a system where everybody in this country would get benefits. That means handouts to hedge fund managers paid for by tax hikes on working people. Labour's policy, money for the rich, paid by taxes on the poor.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As already noted, 40 years ago, Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, and during her premiership, she convinced people like me and people from modest backgrounds right across the country that it's the Conservative Party that's the party of opportunity and aspiration. Does the Prime Minister agree that education plays a pivotal role in unlocking these opportunities and enabling social mobility? And will education and skills funding receive the attention it therefore deserves in the upcoming spending round?
I say to my honourable friend, of course, we're already putting record levels of funding into our schools, £43.5 billion. Of course, he's trying to tempt me to talk about the spending review that is upcoming, but I can assure him that we're committed to improving education for every child, because I absolutely, passionately believe that we should be making sure that how far a child goes in life doesn't depend on their background or their circumstances or who their parents are, but it actually depends on their individual talents and their hard work. Everybody in this country should be able to go as far as their talents and their hard work will take them.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in welcoming Mental Health Awareness Week? Mr. Speaker, pending your approval, we now know that the Prime Minister's 3 times defeated Brexit deal will return yet again in June. Can the Prime Minister tell us, has a backroom agreement been reached with the Leader of the Opposition to sell out the people of Scotland and force her shoddy deal through?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, the only party that wants to sell out the interests of Scotland are the SNP, and when they're for independence.
Ian Blackford. Not quite sure, Mr. Speaker, what that had to do with the question. You might at least try, Prime Minister, to answer the question. The people of Scotland are none the wiser of what is going on in these secret Tory Labour talks. Scotland's people and the will of the Scottish Parliament is being ignored. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. Why is the Prime Minister so afraid of giving the people of Scotland their say? The fact is, at the European elections next week, the people of Scotland will make their voices heard, whether Westminster likes it or not. Next Thursday, the people of Scotland can vote SNP to stop Brexit and send a clear message that Scotland will not be ignored anymore.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about the people of Scotland not knowing where things stand. Well, the people of Scotland will know where things stand if the right honourable gentleman and his colleagues vote for the withdrawal agreement bill and ensure that we leave the European Union. And if people want to vote for a party that not only is a Brexit party, but also is a party in government that can deliver Brexit, they should vote Conservative.
Mr. Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that if we were to stay in a customs union and a single market, that we'd have to pay billions into the European Union, that we couldn't do free trade deals around the world, and we couldn't control our own immigration, and that we will never betray the promise that we made at the last general election, that we will deliver the full Brexit, unlike the broken promises from the party opposite?
I say to my right honourable friend, I'm happy to confirm to him that we do indeed remain committed not just to delivering Brexit and to securing a majority in this House to do just that, but I can reassure him on his specific points. In leaving the European Union, we will end free movement, restore full control over our immigration policy, open up new trading opportunities around the world, and end the days of sending vast payments to the European Union. And we will not pay for market access. And he mentions the last election and commitments that were made at the last election, because he and I both stood on a manifesto promising to deliver the best possible deal for Britain as we leave the European Union, delivered by a smooth, orderly Brexit, as we seek a new, deep and special partnership, including a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement with the European Union. I'm committed to those objectives. I believe that we've negotiated a good deal that delivers on those, and I'm determined to deliver it.
Bill Esterson.
This government say they are committed to tackling climate change, yet too often the evidence suggests otherwise. Take the examples of their support for an oil refinery in Bahrain, but their refusal to help award-winning tidal energy specialists Nova Innovation. The reality is 99.4% of UK export finance in the energy sector goes on fossil fuel projects. If this government is serious about addressing the climate emergency, will they prove it by investing in the future, not the past?
What can I say to the honourable gentleman? We are investing in the future and not the past. That's why we've been encouraging issues like electric vehicles, the battery technology that is taking place here in the UK. But he talks about our interest and our support for what we need to do on climate change. Just look at our record. Our renewable energy capacity has quadrupled since 2010. Annual support for renewables will be over 10 billion by 2021. 99% of solar power deployed in the UK has been deployed under the Conservative in government, and we have been decarbonising at a faster rate than any other country in the G20.
Andrew Lua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's vital for trust in the Prime Minister and the government for dates to be set and then stuck to. Can we have a definitive and unalterable date for the release of the Green Paper on adult care?
Can I say to my honourable friend, he's absolutely right that we need to abide by and will abide by the government's commitment to publish a Green Paper in relation to adult social care. We want to ensure that when we do that, we are able to bring forward proposals that deliver the answer to the question, or possible answers to the question we have to ask ourselves, which is how we can ensure that support for social care, that social care system, is sustainable into the future. We will be publishing it at the earliest opportunity, and it will set out those proposals to ensure that social care system is sustainable in the longer term.
Pete Wisher. I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but it's looking a bit threadbare over on these benches just here. Maybe we should examine the reason why. The government can barely secure double figures in the opinion polls. The UK is now an international laughingstock, with her backbench just wanting her going, as does the nation. She's now going to be bringing back her withdrawal agreement for a fourth tanking as her backbench queue up to say they won't support her. Has the road now just not run out, Prime Minister? And for the sake of her nation, will she please just go and let Scotland go too?
Well, I can say to the right honourable gentleman that from his references to those of us across this House, it's obvious his charm offensive to become next Speaker has already started. Can I also say to him it's in the interests of Scotland that it remains part of the United Kingdom, and it's the interest of the whole of the United Kingdom that we deliver on what people voted for in the referendum and deliver Brexit.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 15,200 children in Somerset are now in good and outstanding schools compared to 2010. Great news. But despite 5.9% more funding per pupil going into Somerset, teachers and parents are coming to me increasingly from Taunton Deane to say that they are under funding pressures. And they are in the 5th lowest for secondary school funding and the bottom 3rd for primary school funding. So would the Prime Minister agree with me that to give our children the very best opportunity in life, we must correct this funding injustice in Somerset, and with a strong economy overseen by this government, we can and we should do it.
Can I say to my honourable friend, can I thank her for the comments she makes about the increasing number of children in Somerset in good and outstanding schools. It is indeed, as she says, our management of the economy, the strong economy that enables us to put more money into our public services like education. That's why we are putting a record level of funding into schools this year, giving every local authority more money for every pupil in every school. But also, of course, we have introduced the new funding formula to make the distribution more fairer across schools across the country, because what we want to do is to keep on improving the education for every child. So, as I said in response to an earlier question from my honourable friend, we have the opportunity to ensure that every child can go on and achieve their full potential.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As this is Mental Health Awareness Week, does the Prime Minister agree with the Labour Party that it's time to scrap tests for pre-teenage children, such as SATs and in Kent the 11+, that we know cause them to experience stress, anxiety and a sense of failure?
I'd say to the honourable lady, what is important as children go through their education is we make sure they are receiving the right education for them, and we make sure that the schools are providing the right quality of education. And simple tests that enable those judgments to be made about where children are in relation to their learning through their school career, I believe is right. It was right that those were introduced, and it's right that they continue.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is Mental Health Awareness Week, and it's also exam time. And in Chelmsford at Anglia Ruskin University, the staff and students care deeply about supporting all those with mental health issues. So will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, urge the Secretaries of State for Health and Education to work together to provide a specific fund so that our universities can develop new and innovative ways to help students with mental health pressures?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise the issue of mental health in universities, and it is important. It is a priority for the government. NHS England is already working closely with Universities UK through the Mental Health in Higher Education programme to build the capability and capacity of universities to be able to improve student welfare services and improve access to mental health services. But I will ensure, and I will be happy to ask both the Health and Education Secretaries to consider options to look at this further.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is now well aware that I've had the privilege of serving the people of Huddersfield for 40 years. But is she aware that when I came into this House, I was a passionate Eurosceptic? And the reason that I changed my mind, I saw how the European Union delivered prosperity, cleaning up the environment, keeping the peace, keeping our security. It changed my mind about the value to all the people in this country, as well as my constituents, staying in the EU. Isn't it time that the Prime Minister spoke out the truth about Europe rather than the big lie of the UKIP party?
I say to the honourable gentleman that I think this House voted for the referendum. The government of the time said that it would abide by the decision of the referendum. The people voted, the people made their choice, and I think it is right that this government delivers on that choice and delivers Brexit. And the honourable gentleman mentioned, we've mentioned earlier him coming into this House, and he's been serving his constituents for 40 years. He mentioned prosperity. Actually, in 1979, it was a Conservative government that came in and turned around all the problems of a Labour government and gave this country prosperity.
Ross Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, on behalf of animal lovers across the country, may I congratulate you on introducing Lucy's Law to stamp out the horrific and barbaric practice of puppy and kitten farming. However, this law only applies to England, and with the Welsh consultation closing this week, does my right honourable friend agree with me that unless the SNP government now act to introduce Lucy's Law, there is a real risk of Scotland becoming a hub for unscrupulous puppy farmers, and Scotland cannot be left behind?
I think my honourable friend raises a very important point. I'd like to congratulate him on the work that he did on this issue, because I know he raised it regularly and championed this particular cause. But it is ironic that as an MP for a Scottish seat, he was able to help to change the law here in England and ensure that this was brought in, where the SNP government in Scotland are not willing to change that law. And I think it's time the SNP government got on with the day job and actually started legislating for things that matter to people in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that it's her deal, no deal or no exit from the EU. But we voted against her deal and we voted against no deal for good reasons. But she's not shifted and she's out of time. Will she admit now that all that's left is no exit, or will she go back to the people?
I say to the honourable lady, she knows full well my response to the question about going back to the people. I believe the people were given the choice as to whether we should stay in the European Union in 2016 in the referendum. They voted, they gave their decision, and I believe it is up to this government, not just this government, but this House, to respect the decision that was taken when we as a Parliament gave people that choice.
Simon Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a crucial time, can I take this opportunity to highlight the absolutely vital importance of supporting British steel, and in particular the world-leading Special Profiles division at Skinning Grove in my constituency. This is a profitable business and a jewel in the crown of UK steelmaking. And can I urge my right honourable friend to deliver a productive outcome to the talks that are ongoing as swiftly as possible?
Yes. Well, my honourable friend has raised an important point about British Steel, and obviously I can't comment on the speculation about the future of Greybull capital-owned British Steel. I realise this is a worrying time for those who are employed there and their families. As everybody would expect across this House, the Business Department is in regular contact with a wide range of sectors and companies. But of course, last month, the government did enter into a commercial agreement with British Steel relating to their obligations under the EU Emissions Trading Scheme, which has provided support to that company.
Mrs. Sharon Hodgson.
Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister received a copy of the Children's Future Food Inquiries report delivered to Number 10 by Dame Emma Thompson and 6 young food ambassadors who've all experienced food poverty. On her government's watch, The End Child Poverty Coalition have found that 500,000 more children are having their lives blighted by food poverty than at the start of this decade. Will the Prime Minister meet with these young food ambassadors and to discuss their Right to Food Children's Charter as soon as possible?
I say to the Honourable Lady, I haven't actually seen the Charter yet, and so I will look carefully at that Charter. But as I've said in response to a number of questions on this issue, what is important is that we have in this country an economy that enables people to get into good jobs. That's what we are delivering as a Conservative Party in government. That is what enables people to have that stability in their income. That's what enables people to be able to care for their children.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming the final evaluation of the National Bereavement Care Pathway? It found that 9 in 10 parents who'd suffered the loss of a child felt that they were treated with sensitively and with respect.
And the Honourable Lady has passed the test with flying colours. Antoinette Sandbach.
Not only did the Honourable Lady pass the test, Mr. Speaker, but so did the National Bereavement Care Pathway. It also found that 8 in 10 healthcare professionals felt supported to deliver good quality bereavement care. Does the Prime Minister agree that these results are a rallying call to the remaining NHS Trust to adopt the National Bereavement Care Pathway, ensuring that all bereaved parents will receive better bereavement care?
What can I say, first of all, to my honourable friend? I realise this is an issue that is close to the hearts of many members across this House, including my honourable friend, who has spoken most movingly on this subject. And I'd like to thank the APPG for all their work on this issue, because we do believe and recognise that all bereaved parents should be offered the same high standard of care and support in an appropriate environment. These results do indeed show the benefit of the National Bereavement Care Pathway. It's already helped to strengthen the support for many bereaved families across the country, and I would certainly urge all trusts to adopt this approach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We rightly condemn the denial or abuse of trade union rights in Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, Colombia and many other countries. So will the Prime Minister agree that the victory by Unite trade union members, who won £1.9 million compensation after major construction firms unlawfully blacklisted and denied them work, is a victory for British values? Does she agree that free and independent trade unions are a valued part of our democracy? Will she condemn the illegal actions of these construction companies and, in an open democracy, guarantee trade union representatives a right of access to workplaces to speak to employees about their rights at work?
Can I say to the Right Honourable Lady that I recognise the important role that trade unions play in our democracy and the work that can be done with trade unions to ensure that we are enhancing workers' rights in this country. It's exactly what this government is doing. We want to see workers' rights being enhanced and improved. We're already on track to do that, and I look forward to us continuing to be able to do that in the future.
O'Brien. Mr. Speaker, a couple of weeks ago I asked the Prime Minister about a family in my constituency who desperately need the life-changing drug Spinraza. This morning we have the wonderful news that it's going to be made available in England. But will the Prime Minister now press for a managed access agreement to be put in place as soon as possible, because the children who need this drug can't afford to wait a single day more?
Hear, hear. No, well, my honourable friend raised a very important issue at the time, and I'm very pleased that NHS England and Biogen have agreed a deal that enables NICE to recommend this revolutionary new treatment. It does have the potential, as my honourable friend has said, to transform the lives of young children with spinal muscular atrophy and their families, and I will certainly ensure that his request in relation to making sure that this is available as quickly as possible is acted on by the Department.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research by the Victoria Derbyshire Show has revealed that in the last 5 years, 4 children have been murdered following contact granted by the family courts to known abusers. This morning, over 120 MPs have written to the Justice Secretary calling for an independent inquiry into the treatment of victims of domestic abuse and violence by the family courts. Does the Prime Minister agree that there is something wrong with a system that forces contact between children and parents that are known risks to that child? And if she does agree, will she commission that independent inquiry today?
to the Honourable Lady that the family court system should never be used to coerce or to re-victimise those who have been abused, and a child's welfare must be the paramount consideration for the court in any proceedings. I'm pleased that the President of the Family Division has published some new draft guidelines just last week, which provides greater clarity on some issues around the family court, such as increasing transparency. The Ministry of Justice currently have not seen evidence to suggest a public inquiry is necessary, but I will ensure that the new Minister for Justice meets the Honourable Lady to discuss the concerns that she has raised.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister congratulate the hard-working campaign team in Redditch who secured an increased majority on the Redditch Borough Councillors in the local elections earlier this month? Will she visit Redditch to find out how they are starting to put in place plans to unlock Redditch? And will she recommit her government's resources to the crucial issue of regenerating towns and high streets up and down the country?
Well, I'm very happy to congratulate all those campaigners, those elected councillors, for the success that they had in the Redditch Borough Council elections. And I'm pleased to see Redditch Council actually moving forward with its plans to improve the town of Redditch. And certainly we remain committed. We have allocated sums to ensure that we can see improvements in towns up and down the country, and we continue our commitment to that. And as for the invitation, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I will ensure that my diary secretary has that, and we will see if that is possible.
Albert Owen.
Speaker, my constituent Gerald Corrigan was shot with a crossbow outside his home on Good Friday. This weekend, he died of those severe injuries. I'm sure the House will join me in sympathising with his family, his partner and his friends. The community is in shock. Can the Prime Minister join me in appealing to the public for any information and to give that information to North Wales Police in confidence? And can she give assurances that the law on crossbows will be reviewed in light of the number of incidents, and also ensure that the police have enough resources to carry out this now murder inquiry?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he's obviously raised a very worrying case, and as he says, the thoughts of the whole House are with the family and friends and partner of his constituent. This is it's terrible when one hears of an incident such as this. It's absolutely right. The Home Secretary has heard the comments that the honourable gentleman has raised in relation to the law on crossbows, and I absolutely join with the honourable gentleman encouraging any member of the public who has any information about what happened to get in touch with the police. There is of course the anonymous route to be able to give evidence, to give information for it to reach the police without being identified if people are concerned about that. But if anybody knows anything about this that can help to catch those who are responsible, then I urge them to come forward.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For more than 20 years, I've worked with an incredible group of Conservatives in Wellingborough and Rushden. They raise money for the party, they deliver leaflets, and they knock on doors, week in, week out. This Saturday, 40 of us went out campaigning for the European elections. But unfortunately, sir, I have here a letter from those Conservatives addressed to the Prime Minister. They say that her deal is worse than staying in the European Union, that they want us to come out now on a no-deal basis. And, sir, more importantly, they've lost confidence in the Prime Minister and wish her to resign before the European elections. Prime Minister, what message do you have to say to these dedicated and loyal Conservatives?
Can I say to... First of all, can I say to my honourable friend, I say to those members of the Conservative Party across the country who campaign regularly for elections of all sorts. We've just heard of that group in Redditch who succeeded in getting excellent results in Redditch Borough Council elections. All Conservatives who campaign, I first of all thank them for the time and effort that they put into promoting the Conservative cause. And secondly, I would say to Conservatives up and down the country who are concerned about delivering Brexit, this is a government that wants to deliver Brexit and has been working to deliver Brexit. Sadly, so far, the House of Commons has not found a majority to do that. If everybody in the House of Commons had voted alongside with the government and the majority of Conservative members of Parliament, we would already have left the European Union.
Catherine West! West!
Mr. Speaker, the people of Hornsey and Wood Green are completely distraught at the British Council worker Theresa May, who has been taken and put into prison in Iran suddenly. The Foreign Secretary is currently having a meeting with me and the family on Friday, but please, could she condemn this action by Iran, and could she please speak to President Rouhani urgently about this terrible situation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that obviously we are concerned, we're always concerned when we see sentencing of any individual purely on the basis of their employment with an entirely legitimate institution, which is what is the case. It's utterly shocking. I'm deeply concerned by the turn of events that has taken place, and my thoughts are with the individual and her family at this time. As the Honourable Lady has seen, the Foreign Secretary is taking this issue up. The government will press the case and the concerns that have been raised in relation to this. But sadly, the arrest of this individual shows that Iran's attitude towards entirely legitimate organisations which are trying to foster better relations and cultural understanding between countries. But this is an issue that the government, as she has noted, the Foreign Secretary will take up.
And finally, Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is rightly regarded by Scottish Conservatives as a trenchant champion of the Union. And thank goodness for that. So will she agree with me that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is an opportunity to strengthen the Union? And will she confirm that that fund will be led by the needs of communities and will not be Barnettised?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, it is absolutely right that we have an opportunity with the Shared Prosperity Fund to ensure that we are recognising the ways in which we can reduce the disparities between communities and between nations within the United Kingdom. And it is absolutely right, as he says, that this should be led by the needs on the ground, and we should make sure that money is spent effectively and delivers for people, and that's our intention.
Thank you. Order. Yes, I think the right honourable gentleman's point of order, of which I think I had advanced knowledge, should be heard in an atmosphere of calm and of respect. If there are colleagues enormously attracted to conducting their own private conversations, which I'm sure are of the most intense interest to them, perhaps they would be good enough to do so, I say, looking meaningfully at the honourable gentleman for Stone outside of the chamber, so that the rest of us can listen to the point of order from the right honourable gentleman member for Hemel Hempstead. Point of order, Sir Mike Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 42 years ago, in the early hours of that morning, a brave British soldier who was from 3 Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, was abducted or captured by the IRA. Captain Robert Nyrak was my captain, a gentleman that in the boxing ring broke my nose, the first person to have done so. We still do not know what happened to him. This country owes a debt to our soldiers in Northern Ireland, and particularly to those that have given the utmost for their country. Mr. Speaker, is there any way you think I could mark 42 years of Captain Robert Nyrak giving his life for this country and for the peace of Northern Ireland?
I'm most grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his point of order, and I am minded to hear that of the honourable gentleman if it is on a similar subject. Am I right? I believe it to be. And then I will respond. Point of order, Mr. Gavin Robinson.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, and mindful of the respect that should be shown to the issue raised by the right honourable member for Hemel Hempstead. Mr. Speaker, on the 31st of January, I sought and received an assurance from the Attorney General that any proposal that was brought forward to protect veterans would apply equally across the United Kingdom. In fact, he said it would be plainly wrong should it not apply equally. I am therefore perturbed to read in the press, and not here in this House, but read in the press that proposals brought forward to protect veterans from our country will not apply to Northern Ireland. And aside from the discourtesy to this House, it shows scant disregard, Mr. Speaker, for people the length and breadth of this United Kingdom who stood to protect our interests, our values and our democracy. Mr. Speaker, are you aware of any indication from the Defence Secretary that she intends to make an oral statement on this matter?
I will respond to that point before coming to others. I must say to the honourable gentleman that I've not been advised of any imminent statement by the Secretary of State or indeed by any other Minister, but I've heard what the honourable gentleman has said. I recognise that this will be a matter on which there are very strong feelings indeed, and if the honourable gentleman is dissatisfied with what he believes to be government intention and with the absence of any confirmatory oral statement which clarifies the matter, it is open to him to seek to air it further in the chamber by means that are well known to him. And the nodding of the head in assent to my proposition from his right honourable friend, the leader of his party, is testimony to their recognition of what I'm saying. If they want to return to this matter very soon, it is open to them to seek to do so. I'm very sensitive to the point the right honourable gentleman member for Hemel Hempstead raised. Rather than giving an inevitably provisional and possibly unsatisfactory reply off the top of my head, what I would like to say to the right honourable gentleman is I'm very open to the idea of recognition in the way that he suggests. It seems to me that that warrants a further discussion, and if the right honourable gentleman wants to come to see me, either alone or accompanied by colleagues, particularly if it is a cross-party delegation, I would be very open to seeing him and to exploring whether, and if so, how recognition might be provided. And meanwhile, I'll take other points of order, of course. Point of order, Mr. James Gray.
Allowed point of order, Mr. Speaker. Am I right in believing that the bill which the Secretary of State for Defence has announced overnight that she will introduce to bring in a 10-year statute of limitation on cases such as we've heard about so far, but excluding Northern Ireland, am I right in believing that that bill will be amendable and that therefore, if this House chose to do so, we could bring Northern Ireland back into it?
Well, I haven't seen the said bill, and I don't know if it's yet drafted. And I may be taking a modest risk in saying what I do to the honourable member for North Wiltshire, but with very few exceptions, bills are amendable. Indeed, the concept of the unamendable bill is by no means empirically proven. Sometimes people draft bills in the hope that they can't be amended, but their hope is usually dashed. And I've no reason to suppose that a bill of the type that the honourable gentleman is describing, I've no reason to suppose that it would be unamendable. If it requires a fertile mind, well, that's no bar to the efforts and perspicacity of the honourable gentleman. Point of order, Mr. Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to my right honourable friend for Hemel Hempstead's point of order on Captain Narek, who was awarded posthumously the George Cross, our highest civilian gallantry award, can I remind the House that for several hours Captain Narek was tortured heinously, beaten up, hit with a wooden post, and eventually an IRA terrorist killer came to him and said, "You've had it." And what happened then, apparently, Robert Narek said very little except asking for God's grace. He died in an incredibly gallant way, and we should, I agree with you, Mr. Speaker, I think we should recognise the great gallantry of this man.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for what he said, and I was particularly interested to hear him develop his point fully, even if it wasn't entirely a point of order, out of respect for the track record of military service, as well as political service, but more particularly the track record of military service of the honourable gentleman, which is well known across this House, and which itself has been marked by extraordinary professionalism, resilience and bravery. Point of order, Mr. Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I entirely concur with my right honourable gallant friends, and over the
comment that they've said, and I welcome your approach, Mr. Speaker, to recognising Captain Robert Norrick, who served with such distinction and died under such appalling circumstances. Can I also just make the point, as I understand it, that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is going to make a written statement rather than an oral statement? Is that, she's nodding her head, maybe I've got it wrong. But I also like to make the point, if I may, Mr. Speaker, that this pursuit of our armed forces, our veterans, 200 of them, for things allegedly done many, many years ago, is totally unacceptable, and it must end forthwith.
The Honourable Gentleman has made his point with force and alacrity, and it will have been heard on the Treasury bench. I think there's certainly no confirmation of that notion of a written statement, and the Honourable Gentleman will have seen dissent from that proposition. I'm aware that consideration has been given to a statement, but I think it's seemly if we leave it there and await the development of events. I must say, in all courtesy to the Honourable Gentleman, and I don't expect he'll dissent from this, that I don't want to produce a ranking list today, but suffice it to say that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, in my experience, has been amongst the most courteous of members of the government in keeping the chair informed of her intentions and trying to do the right thing by the House. I found her absolutely fastidious in that regard. So I think let's just wait to see how events unfold. But I thank him for what he said, and I respect the sincerity with which he says it, as well as his own background as a soldier, which I'm sure has motivated him.
Point of order.
Yes, indeed. Point of order, Jed Killen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm seeking your advice on an issue relating to my constituent, Sabir Zazai. Mr. Zazai is to be honoured by the University of Glasgow for service to civil society over the last 20 years. He's the CEO of the Scottish Refugee Council, and understandably he wishes his family to join him for that very special occasion. Unfortunately, Mr. Zazai's father's visit visa has been refused. I've written to the Home Secretary about this matter, and his department unfortunately has declined to intervene and referred my office back to UKVI, who have a 20 working day time frame. The graduation is on the 11th of June. The next opportunity for Home Office questions won't be until the 3rd of June. Can you advise any other means or channels that I can use to raise this matter directly with the Home Secretary?
I think to a considerable extent the Honourable Gentleman has achieved his own salvation. He's aired it on the floor of the House, and I rather imagine the fact that he's done so will quickly be communicated to the Government. But if the Honourable Gentleman's in doubt on that point, he should try to ensure that his words are conveyed to UKBI sooner rather than later. And I would hope that some resolution can be achieved. The idea that the award should have to be deferred to some subsequent date, naturally occurs, but it would be very regrettable. And I very much hope that he can achieve a speedy resolution of this matter. I quite understand why he wants that to happen, and anybody receiving such an award would naturally want to receive that award duly accompanied. And if there are I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. If there are no further points of order, we come now to the urgent question. Tom Watson.
Mr. Speaker, after that significant and important point of order from the gallant and honourable member for Hemel Hempstead, I would like to ask the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport to make a statement on the WhatsApp data breach.
Minister Margot James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm responding to the question from the Shadow Secretary of State as the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport is in Paris for the G7 Digital Ministers meeting. He is meeting political and digital leaders from across the world, including senior representatives of Facebook that owns WhatsApp, to ensure that the technology that is becoming an increasing part of all our daily lives is developed and managed in a safe and ethical manner. I share the concern of all members of the House that WhatsApp has announced this vulnerability and indeed the steps that it is taking to address it. In this instance, the National Cyber Security Centre has acted quickly to assess the risk to UK users and to publish guidance for our user base here in the UK. The NCSC has recommended that users protect their devices by installing updates as soon as they become available,
and I would encourage any users with concerns to check the NCSC website. It's right that people have confidence that their personal data will be protected and used fairly and lawfully. The Data Protection Act that the government passed last year poses strict obligations on organisations to ensure that UK citizens' data is processed safely, securely and transparently. And organisations that fail to comply with the legislation may be investigated by the Information Commissioner's Office, and which received extra resources and more powers last year during the passage of that bill. WhatsApp has designated the Irish Data Protection Authority as their European national regulator, and the ICO will work with and support its Irish counterpart so that the data of UK users is protected. Cybersecurity is of paramount importance to the government, and our cybersecurity strategy, which is supported by a budget of £1.9 billion of investment, sets out ambitious policies to protect UK citizens and businesses in cyberspace. Mr. Speaker, trust is the foundation of our digital economy, and cybersecurity is absolutely vital in giving the stability and certainty that businesses need to thrive and in which the public must have confidence.
Tom Watson.
Well, here we are again, Mr. Speaker. Another day, another serious major data breach from a Mark Zuckerberg company. And I'm glad the Secretary of State is with Facebook today, because there are a number of questions we can suggest he puts to Facebook. But first, Mr. Speaker, what has gone on? Spyware called Pegasus, created by the Israeli security company NSO Group, has been used to hack the phones of lawyers and human rights activists. The news reports read like a nightmare, a dystopian world of tech-enabled total surveillance. The spyware transits malicious code via a WhatsApp call. The target does not even know to answer the call, doesn't have to answer the call for the phone to be infected. According to the New York Times, once the spyware is installed, it can extract everything: messages, contacts, GPS location, email, browser history. It can even use the phone's camera and microphone to record the user's surroundings. That's terrifying. 1.5 billion people worldwide use WhatsApp. Millions here in the UK. Many of them will have been drawn to the service for its USP end-to-end encryption that ensures user privacy. Now we find out that a gap in WhatsApp's defences has enabled a complete violation of that privacy. What is the Minister doing to work with GCHQ, the National Cyber Security Centre and the tech industry players to protect the UK's digital communications and privacy? Media reports say that WhatsApp contacted the US Department of Justice earlier this month when it found out about the hack. But when was the Minister notified about the hack? When was the Information Commissioner informed? How many users in the UK are affected? Have those affected been notified? If she doesn't know the answer, will she commit to update the House when she does? This spyware was licensed for export by the Israeli government. What assurances can the Minister provide social media companies that any digital surveillance products the UK is exporting will not be misused to track and monitor human rights defenders? The particular vulnerability of WhatsApp was the voice over internet protocol, the process for receiving calls over the internet. As telecoms companies modernise, they are all moving away from calls over copper lines and phasing in calling via the internet. What is the Minister doing to ensure these companies don't have vulnerabilities like we are discussing today? This attack looks like it was carried out by a malicious actor, possibly other state actors, trying to close down journalists, dissidents, human rights activists and lawyers seeking justice. But exactly this kind of surveillance was given legal basis in the Investigatory Powers Act, which the Right Honourable Member for Holton, Price and Howden and I fought in the courts and won concessions on. The government wants tech companies to build back doors into their services. But this is an example of what happens if malicious actors find those doors. Those who are fighting for justice and what's right come under attack. The government must not allow that to happen.
Minister James.
Mr. Speaker, I share the Shadow Secretary of State's outrage and shock at this latest development, and I agree with him that these transgressions are happening far too frequently. The Secretary of State for DCMS has already raised his deep concern about this latest report with Nick Clegg, the Global Head of Public Affairs for Facebook, at the Paris Summit. I'm sorry that the honourable members find that amusing, but I'm afraid he is the senior head of global affairs for Facebook. He sits on the main board. He is the appropriate person for my Secretary of State to raise this matter with at the outset. I share, of course, the particular concern that WhatsApp is an encrypted service, and therefore users are entitled to have an even greater confidence in their privacy when they use WhatsApp than when they are using other social media platforms. The Right Honourable Gentleman asked me what we are doing about it, and when I was informed of this breach along with everybody else earlier this week. I will have to find out from my Secretary of State exactly when he was informed later today. I share his concern that, of course, the spyware that was placed seemingly so easily on the WhatsApp service via using the phone contact part of the service to merely call another number, and the act of that call, whether the person answered the call or not, meant that the spyware was installed directly on that user's device. It is, of course, extremely concerning. We are fortunate in Britain to have the National Cyber Security Centre and GCHQ, who are across these matters on a daily basis. And we have published the third cyber security strategy very recently. And within that cyber security strategy, there are a number of cyber defence measures that are taken routinely, constantly, and updated. They are designed to deter and disrupt adversaries. They are designed to develop critical capabilities within the UK and to address systemic vulnerabilities as soon as they are identified. I meet with the NCSC executives on a reasonably regular basis, and I take my responsibilities for cybersecurity from the DCMS perspective extremely seriously. And I share the concern that this kind of attack could be used by a state to monitor human rights activists. This is deeply concerning, and I am assured by the NCSC that the advice that they are giving at the moment is what we should all be following, and they are investigating the likelihood of any UK users having been victims of this latest attack, but as yet I don't have any further information on that particular point to inform the House.
James Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me? What this reveals is the changing nature and the evolving nature of the threat from cyberspace. And what the government needs to do is to redouble its efforts on a cross-government basis to work together on the national cybersecurity strategy, but also develop those cooperative relationships with business, both large and small, so that these threats can be robustly combated.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he's absolutely right. The threat is evolving all the time. It is morphing from one aspect to another, and therefore it is very important that we keep business and citizens informed of what they can best do in order to protect themselves against these threats. And as part of the National Cybersecurity Centre strategy that I alluded to earlier, we have advice, the Cyber Essentials Guide for all sizes of businesses, and we also have a small business guide that is on the NCSC website, and the NCSC can provide tailored advice to companies when they are under a particular threat.
Drew Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This massive cybersecurity breach simply underlines why we need to be part of the European institutions designed to tackle these issues. Leaving, for example, the European Defence Agency and its policies will leave the UK substantially more vulnerable to such cyber attacks. But I'd like to ask the Minister, she's asked about the timing of this information. This hack was discovered a month ago. So when did the company alert the government exactly, and the security services, and has the government taken any action on this? The US Justice Department was apparently told last week. Have the security services ever used the Pegasus malware or similar spyware software? And does the government have any contracts with the NSO group, who recently had revenues of $251 million in 2018, or indeed with WhatsApp themselves?
Minister.
I would clarify one point that the honourable gentleman raised in relation to our membership of the European Union and the impending Brexit. As long as Britain leaves with a deal, preferably the deal that has been negotiated by the Prime Minister, then we will have access on a far smoother basis, continued access to much of this vital information. He asks me about when the government were informed. I've already answered that question really from the honourable gentleman opposite. I was informed earlier this week, and I'm going to find out from my Secretary of State when he was informed. I suspect he was informed earlier than that. And in terms of Pegasus malware and other types of malware, I can assure the honourable gentleman that GCHQ and the NCSC ensure that this country has the very state-of-the-art, excellent malware detection systems at play at all times.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, people largely believed that WhatsApp was a safe app being encrypted, and now we suddenly discover, oh, perhaps it isn't after all. So this is deeply worrying and has caused deep unease in society. So what is the Minister doing to restore the public confidence in data protection? I know we've got various acts in place, but we've got to restore that. And can she give assurances that Mr. Zuckerberg has fixed the flaw and is being and will be brought to task?
Minister.
Well, I will answer the questions that I can answer from my honourable friend. I mean, I can't speak for Facebook and WhatsApp about what they are doing, but I can assure my honourable friends that the Data Protection Act that Parliament passed last year has put in place the strongest privacy standards and rules and laws as part of GDPR across Europe that exists anywhere in the world. And we have in our ICO, in our Information Commissioner's Office, we have the best resourced ICO across Europe, and we also gave her enhanced powers last year, and she has, her office has shown itself to be superb in utilising those powers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this WhatsApp scandal demonstrates again that the government's online harm paper is too little too late, dealing as it does only with harms which arise out of user-generated content. What we need is a robust regulatory framework which assigns rights and responsibilities. And on that, as the Minister has said, when a vulnerability is identified, it is essential to install and update as quickly as possible. Too many of our citizens do not still have access to broadband, fixed wireless broadband, and would have been obliged to install this over mobile networks, incurring significant charges. Who should pay those charges?
Minister.
I would like to reassure the Honourable Lady that we have very robust legislation already in place through the introduction of GDPR. We also have competition law. We have a number of agencies. Indeed, the Honourable benches opposite usually complain that we have too many regulatory bodies in this space. We have the CMA, we have Ofcom, we have the Information Commissioner's Office, and we will be setting up a powerful regulator on the back of our online harms white paper. People should be taking more responsibility for the security of their devices, and the NCSC have very good user advice on their website.
Sir John Hay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No government would find it easy to cope with the rapidly changing character of technology and the protocols associated with it, and I congratulate this Minister on both her diligence and commitment. As the former Minister responsible, I was pleased to put into place the means and methods to deal with this in the form of the Strategy and Security Centre. However, will the Minister acknowledge now that for too long we assumed that these big tech companies could be asked, not told, requested, not obliged, and you cannot be too tough with dealing with these matters, for at risk is the welfare of our citizenry and our nation?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend and congratulate him on the work he has done previously. I agree with him strongly in his thesis that a voluntary approach and asking companies for cooperation has not produced the change that is needed in a timely manner, which is exactly why, in our white paper published last month, we have decided that statutory regulation that obliges companies to places a duty of care upon companies for their users, backed up by a powerful regulator, is the answer to these problems.
I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will be absolutely delighted to have been congratulated by the Minister on the delivery of his thesis, as he is of a notable academic and some would say even philosophical bent. Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following the very serious WhatsApp security breach, what assurances can the Minister provide that social media companies in the UK will ensure products which they are exporting cannot be misused to track or monitor human rights activists and others who themselves might also subsequently face human rights abuses? Can the Minister also inform the House specifically whether any MP has been targeted?
Minister.
I can't give him that assurance, but I can say that the early investigations do point to this being a highly targeted attack. And as I said earlier, the NCSC is investigating whether UK citizens, including members of this House, might have been the butt of the attack. And we await further information on that.
Bob Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, it's somewhat ironic that the former Home Secretary tried to get WhatsApp to overcome their security, so for national security purposes we could get access to messaging. But what messages have been given to British aid workers working overseas, people working in human rights environments who may be very vulnerable to attack if WhatsApp messages are leaked? Surely they should be given a very strong message to not only upgrade to their position, but to be very cautious about their use of WhatsApp until this problem is fixed.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. When an attack like this takes place, it undermines the confidence of users in the app, which is why it is in the interests of the manufacturers to make sure that these products, software products and devices, are increasingly made with a security much more heavily designed into the systems before they are released onto the consumer.
Cat Smith.
Mr. Speaker, with 1.5 billion WhatsApp users worldwide and millions of them here in the UK, users have been attracted by the end-to-end encryption and the guarantee that their messages were secure, but they're relying on sort of normal old-fashioned media to find out about this breach and being told to update their devices. What conversations has the Minister or the Secretary of State had with WhatsApp to bring in a system of prompting WhatsApp to alert users to update the app? Because at the moment, I fear that many of the millions of WhatsApp users here in the UK will not have updated their app, and they should be doing so urgently.
Minister.
I quite agree with the honourable lady that people on hearing about this, and it is ironic that they have to hear about it through traditional print media and television, but on hearing about it, they really should update their WhatsApp and get into the habit of installing security updates whenever they are prompted to do so by the app, and actually to do it proactively. It is easy to visit the App Store and select all for updates, and that should become a routine security precaution that users should take.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is obviously a very serious data breach, as acknowledged on both sides of the chamber. Of course, in the recent Data Protection Act, we have enhanced the Information Commissioner's Office's powers. They could implement a fine of up to 4% of global revenue. Facebook's quarterly revenue last quarter was over £16 billion. That could go quite a long way to helping cover the cost of our security services to counter some of the challenges we've got in the digital space. Does the Minister believe that a fine would be appropriate in these circumstances?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for reminding the House of the significant powers that the ICO now have. Of course, they are there to enforce in terms of the protection of the privacy of UK users, and so it remains to be seen if UK users have been affected by this particular breach. But I'm sure if they have been, the ICO will be making further inquiries.
Darren Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I declare my interest to set out on the register. Firstly, I'm sure the Minister will want to encourage the increasing number of her colleagues with their own budding leadership WhatsApp groups to update their WhatsApp. But my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, made a very important point about this not just being an issue about the encrypted message, but the connection with the device and this transition from the old copper cables, which are dumb, to this VoIP system of broadband connectivity. This is a question for Ofcom, not the ICO. And I wonder whether the Minister could tell the House what conversations she's having with Ofcom about the security standards for connections over the internet-based communications network.
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising the role of Ofcom. Quite rightly, I have regular meetings with the Chief Executive of Ofcom, and I will certainly raise the matter that he raised with me just now with her at my next meeting.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid the Minister's response to my honourable friend from Lancaster and Fleetwood was less than convincing. The reality is that WhatsApp's a critical app that is used in everyday life by millions and millions of people across the UK. It's therefore of national importance that its resilience is protected, and the state has an interest in making sure that happens. Why is the Minister not compelling WhatsApp to ensure that all users in the United Kingdom are alerted to the potential data breach and are obliged to upgrade the software accordingly?
Well, I think that is precisely the content of the discussion that my Secretary of State has had with Facebook just this morning. I agree with the honourable gentleman. WhatsApp and any other platform around which there has been a serious breach of this kind should take responsibility for informing its entire user base immediately. That I completely concur with.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be millions of people with a serious concern that their own data, their conversations with loved ones and business contacts will have been stolen by the spyware, and they'll want to know that someone's being held accountable for it. Does the Minister now agree that it's time to add government pressure to that of the Select Committee to have Mark Zuckerberg come to Parliament and explain himself about what has gone wrong with Facebook and WhatsApp to make sure that we can restore some public trust in him and his company?
I think it's vital that we hold platforms, in this case WhatsApp, to account for the breaches that have occurred. If the breaches have resulted in UK users' data being compromised, then the ICO have the powers to investigate it thoroughly, and they also have a sanctions regime, which my honourable friend for Mid Worcester pointed out, includes the potential fining of up to 4% of global turnover. And the ICO have proven themselves to be a forceful regulator, and I'm sure that they will be watching this space with great interest.
Ian C. Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the difficulty is that we know that data breaches have happened previously, and we have had no adequate response from Facebook since evidence of those data breaches came through. Isn't the reality that we have to have legislation in place? We're now in an election period where WhatsApp, closed Facebook groups, as we speak, are being used in electoral campaigning, and the law has not changed since all of the issues that the Select Committee on which I serve were raised. and there has been no change. And we have yet another instance of shutting the door after the horse has bolted. We have to act, and the Cabinet Office and the DCMS Select Committee need to take forward as a matter of urgency, particularly steps relating to the electoral position, which is so vulnerable and about which we will not learn anything before polling day next Thursday.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman raises a subject which is top of my priorities at the moment. I have been working with, my department works with the Cabinet Office on making our electoral laws fit for the internet age. And there is a huge requirement for updating, as the honourable gentleman makes clear, and I've read the Select Committee report. It is extremely alarming. The ICO are undertaking at the moment a number of investigations into the matters of concern around our democracy and the security of our democracy. And at the moment, I would advise all members to have a good look at the ICO website, and they should find upon that a draft political code of practice which the ICO have developed under their powers handed to them under the Data Protection Act last year, for advice to political parties on how they use social media platforms and the data that is available to them from those platforms. A very serious matter.
Thank you. Oh, very well. Yes. Point of order, Mr. Bob Blackman.
I just rise on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, because I've just looked at the version history of the WhatsApp advice on what to update. There is no mention whatsoever about security breaches or the need to update your WhatsApp messages because of security. It talks about having stickers in full size and entering phone numbers and seeing who's on WhatsApp. Nothing about security.
Well, I note what the honourable gentleman has said, and it will have been heard by members of the House who may well share his reaction to it. And I thank him for taking this opportunity to put the matter on the record. Just before we come to the next urgent question, I must inform the House that Dr. Andrew Murison has written to me giving notice of his wish to resign from the chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. I therefore declare the chair vacant. In doing so, I hope the whole House will want to join me in appreciation of the work of Dr. Murison in chairing the Select Committee with great commitment and skill. Moreover, colleagues will be aware that he has left the chair of the committee because he has returned to the service of the executive. He has become a minister again, and he was performing from the Treasury bench yesterday at Foreign and Commonwealth Office questions, and we wish him well in the execution of his important new responsibilities. We congratulate him on his success and wish him well. Colleagues, the following will be the arrangements for electing a new chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. Nominations should be submitted in the lower table office or the procedural hub by 5 p.m. on Monday, the 10th of June. Following the House's decision of 4th July 2017, only members of the Conservative Party may be candidates in this election. Colleagues will understand why that is so, but for the benefit of those attending our proceedings who are not members of the House, that is because of a distribution of chairs between the parties. This particular committee has been designated for a Conservative chair in this Parliament. If there is more than one candidate, the ballot will take place on Wednesday, the 12th of June, from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. in Committee Room 16. A briefing note with more details about this election will be made available to members. Order. Urgent question. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care to make a statement on the Learning Disabilities Mortality Review.
Minister Caroline Dinenage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by restating our commitment to reducing the number of preventable deaths among those of our population with a learning disability, and to address the persistent health inequalities that they experience. It is completely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, that people in our country with a learning disability and indeed autism can expect a shorter life than the rest of the population as a whole. Each and every death which might have been prevented is an absolute tragedy, and we mustn't compound that tragedy by failing to learn any of the lessons we can that might improve the care that's provided in the future. And that's why the government in the first place asked NHS England to commission the Learning Disability Mortality Review Programme known as LEADER. The principle behind it, Mr. Speaker, is a relentless determination to learn from these deaths and to put in place changes to the way that care is organised, provided and experienced to make a real difference both locally and nationally. It means challenging often deep-rooted systematic or cultural issues that have existed for decades. It's driven by the fact that we are clear that the quality of care offered to people with a learning disability sometimes falls very short of the standards that we expect, and that, Mr. Speaker, is simply not good enough.